in a series called Messy People of the Old Testament. And could I have that one? Thanks. Messy People of the Old Testament. And this morning, I'm going to talk about Ruth. For some of you, that might be a familiar story. For others, it might be totally new. When we read our Bibles, it's probably well worth saying. John said it last week. I said it the week before. I'm going to say it this week. When we read our Bibles, the Bible is one big story of redemption. One big story of redemption made up of little stories of redemption. When we talk about redemption, we're talking about people are forgiven. We're talking about the lost are found. We're talking about lives that are broken are healed. That's what we mean by the word redemption. And so this morning, it's no different. This is going to be another story of redemption. And the text I want to open up with from Ruth this morning is this. Boaz said to Ruth, "Come and eat some bread and dip your bread in wine." Come and eat some bread and dip your bread in wine. So here's what we're going to do at the end of this message. We're going to come and we're going to eat some bread and we're going to dip it in some wine. And we're going to remember that Ruth's story of redemption is also our story of redemption. That's what we're going to do. Ruth, the book of Ruth is kind of wedged in there in the Old Testament. If you want to find it, it's page 224 in my Bible. But it's wedged in there between Judges and Samuel, and Ruth is kind of different to Moses' story. By the way, sometimes we'll tell the whole story. Sometimes in the weeks to come we'll tell parts of the story. John did an amazing job last week telling part of Moses' story. How many enjoyed that? Really good, hey? He's getting better and better. But Ruth's story is different to Moses' story. Moses' story was marked, like a lot of the stories, with these miraculous interventions, special from birth, set aside, floating down rivers, going to palaces, and angels and seas parting and, angels river dancing and bushes on fire. And Ruth has none of this. Ruth is just really ordinary. And in some ways, I think Ruth is a book that speaks to us. I mean, has any of you parted the Red Sea lately? Has anyone had angels river dancing on the end of your bed? Ruth is kind of like this normal life, but there's God behind the scenes at work, redeeming, saving, kind of like our lives. So hopefully today you'll actually get a lot out of it. And so we need to kick off the story. And the story begins with a family. And the story begins that there's a famine in the land. And if we talk in sort of modern day language, there's an economic crisis happens. And so Elimelech, who's the dad, who's married to Naomi, they basically go bust. They lose their land to the creditors. Like always happens when there's a crisis, it's just a normal, everyday people. They get hit the worst. And he ends up destitute, so much so that he says to his wife and his two sons, we're going to go to Moab because I think prospects are going to be better there. And so they set off to Moab, and on arriving in Moab, the two sons marry Moabite women. The two girls are called Ruth and Orpah. And so they marry, and within a short period of time of arriving in Moab, Naomi's husband dies. We don't know how, but he dies. And Naomi is living there with her son-in-laws, her sons and her daughter-in-laws, and is in Moab for 10 years. And then it says in the Bible that both her sons pass away. We don't know how they die. It doesn't say whether it was some sort of disease or some sort of tragedy or calamity. But already there's more people dying than in Game of Thrones. So a lot of the people you were just trying to commit to memory there have just been wiped out. But it's shocking. And so now Ruth and Orpah and Naomi, the mum, are left in Moab, and Naomi's destitute. She's got her 2 daughter-in-laws there, and so she decides what she will do is she says, I'm going to go back because these guys are from a little village, really, Bethlehem. Not a known place in this part of, as we read the Bible, nothing really significant about Bethlehem at this time. And she goes, I'm destitute in Moab. I may as well go home and be around at least extended family and be destitute in Bethlehem. So she decides to return. And her 2 daughters pack up with her, and they set back. And on the road back to Bethlehem, Naomi just stops herself. She just stops and she says, what am I doing? And she turns to her girls and she said to her girls, just go home to your family. You don't have to come with me. I've got nothing to offer you. Go home to your family. You're still young. There's still opportunity for you to get married. She even says, what if, I literally met someone tomorrow and had children straight away and produced sons for you. Would you wait for them to become of age so you could marry them? This is not going to work. And so she just says to them, I don't want to wreck your life as well. You go back. And I want you to picture this. They're on the road and there's tears and there's crying. And it says in the Bible, in the passage here, that Orpah, she kisses her mum and she says, Mum, goodbye. And she leaves. And Naomi looks at Ruth. And Ruth, it says, clings to Naomi. And she says, I'm not going to leave you. And she says these beautiful words, these famous words that we often hear. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. And your God, my God. So they go home. And on arriving back at home in small little Bethlehem, Naomi's recognized and say, is this Naomi? She's about 50 years of age. Ruth's in her 20s. Is this Naomi? She's the same. She's got a few more lines on her face. A bit more weathered by life, but it's Naomi. And Naomi says, don't call me Naomi, because Naomi actually means pleasant. She says, I want you to call me Mara, because Mara actually means bitter. And she says, because the Lord has made my life bitter. I've lost my husband. I've lost my sons. We're destitute. My life is bitter. Naomi and Ruth are on the lowest rung of the socio-economic ladder now. They're pretty poor. They're widows, and they have in a patriarchal society, they have no one to care for them. And so literally, they're one step away from destitution. They're one step away from extinction. And when they arrive back in Bethlehem, it's harvest time. And so these people, this beautiful lady and her daughter, they need redeeming. They need help. And they need what the Bible calls justice. And justice not in the sense that often we think of it like retributive justice, where someone does something wrong, like get them back. But justice in the biblical sense that they need someone to put things right. You ever been in a place where you just say, I need justice. We need the world to be put right? That's what they needed. And the Torah, often we don't like reading the Old Testament, but the Torah was deeply concerned with this idea of justice and putting things right. It wasn't all bad. We read sometimes Jesus as if he, is like, the Torah, rubbish. Yeah, grace, and it's not like that at all. There was actually this deep concern within the law for the poor. And so there would be like laws Things like when you go and harvest a field, you couldn't harvest a whole lot, but you had to leave the edges so that the poor could come and glean. There were laws like, if you had bales of grain or on your cart, and one, the donkey or whatever accidentally moved forward and one bale fell off, or two, you had to leave them there. Because maybe providentially it was God saying, hey, I want the poor to have those bales. So there were these laws set in place that cared for the poor. But in saying that, it still wasn't a safe place to go and be a poor woman gleaning in the field, especially if you're a Moabite woman. And I'll get to that in a minute. But Ruth was a Moabite woman. And so, because it's harvest time, Naomi being 50-something, she's really beyond the age where she can go out and work all day under the sun. So her daughter says to her, Ruth says to her, Mum, I'm going to go in the fields and I'm going to go and glean. And so she sets off and she arrives at Boaz's field. And Boaz is like a cousin to Naomi's deceased husband, Elimelech. And she's in the field of Boaz, and she's been there from early morning. She's gleaning around the side along with Boaz's servants and maidservants, and they're there. And Boaz arrives a bit later on in the day because, I don't know, he slept in or he had business in town. Who knows what he was doing. But he arrives and he notices Ruth straight away. And he says to his hired hands, he says, who's that lady? Because she was fine. He notices her, it says in the Bible. And they said, that's Naomi's daughter-in-law, and she's a Moabite, and she's returned with Naomi. And she's been gleaning all day, and she's been working really hard. And she hasn't had a rest, except for one little rest she's been working in. And Boaz goes, this is interesting. And so he goes over to her, and he begins to talk to her. I keep saying that Ruth is a Moabite for a reason, because actually when you read in the Bible account, it says it constantly. And the reason it says it constantly is because there's a little backstory. Ruth begins to engage Boaz in regards to conversation. And Boaz speaks really kindly to Ruth. And it's not just because she's a lovely lady, a lovely girl. But he's heard how she treated her mum, Naomi, how she was loyal and faithful and stuck with her. And when Naomi said, go back to your gods, go back to your people, it would be easier for you. How Ruth said, your God will be my God, your people will be my people. And so he begins to speak kindly to her. And he actually says this to her. He says, may you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, or under whose blanket you have come to take refuge. May you be richly rewarded. Now, we sit here and we say, oh, isn't he nice, Boaz? Or you might be like, he's got an angle, that guy, right? Let me tell you a little bit of the backstory about the Moabites. See, as the Israelites were coming out of the wilderness and starting to discover that promised land and come into that season of their walk, there was an incident that happened at an acacia grove. And the incident that happened at the acacia grove, Johnny's smiling, was it sort of goes like this. There's the Israelite men, and the Moabite prostitutes, it said, came and kind of, these innocent Israelite men came and seduced them. They didn't know what was going on. These horrible, seductresses came, and before long they were in this kind of like party. It was happening. I'm just seeing who's in the congregation. Yeah, there was a party. Let's just say party, and the Israelites ended up worshipping Baal Peor and and it became terrible. There was suffering, and people died, and there was judgment, and it was horrific. And from that day forward, written into the code, the Jewish code was this understanding that Moabites were to never, ever be allowed in the assembly of the Israelites. Never allowed to be a part, never allowed to be citizens, never allowed to actually become part. And so this is why it's so mind-blowing that Boaz is speaking these words over Ruth. By the way, this is a love story. And so he speaks these words. And at lunchtime, the blanket gets set out. Boaz sits on the blanket, and he says this. No, he doesn't. He says this. He invites Ruth to come, and he says to Ruth, "Come, hey, come and sit with me. Come and eat some bread, and dip your bread in the wine." Now, if you've been a Christian for even just a few weeks, you'll be sensing here, this sounds like someone else, right? Come and get some bread and dip it in the wine. Like, Boaz is going all Jesus on her, right? Just bam, he's just there, and he's 1,000 years too soon. What's he going to be saying next? Come unto me, all you are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Here he is, just saying this incredible, beautiful words. And Ruth is drawn in. I just want to take a little pit stop for a moment and say, Boaz's interaction with Ruth, the Moabite, is a beautiful example of how we handle the Bible, how we read our Bibles, how we interpret our Bibles. Can I encourage you? As we go through the Old Testament, there is a lot of crazy deals and names. In fact, I think we should have a sealed section sometimes, so little kids can't actually open it up. How many would agree with me? Have you read some of the stuff in here? Boaz's reaction and response to Ruth the Moabite there's some beautiful pictures in here how we should handle this. Firstly, we should always read the Bible through the filter of Jesus. You find Jesus throughout the Old Testament. It's called typology. Find him there. But Scripture must bow the knee to Jesus, right? So we read through the filter of Jesus, but we also read through the filter of love. Of the greatest commandment. What's the greatest commandment? Love God and love your neighbor as yourself. Now, this isn't a foolproof way of handling the Scriptures, but I've found that as I've responded to the Scriptures through these two filters, it's helped me from going off on all sorts of tangents. It's helped me from being a really hard, judgment and mercy. How we have the choice. And the Bible actually says mercy always triumphs over judgment. Glad I didn't get it the other way around. Mercy always triumphs over judgment. You could be a judgment Christian, or you can be a mercy Christian. And when you look and you handle God's word through the filter of Jesus and through the filter of love. See, Jesus did it all the time. The Pharisees were so annoyed. He would break the rules all the time because of love. And when we have the choice, always go through those things. It will lead us to mercy. It will actually cause you to, I think, interpret Scriptures rightly. And more important than interpret them, live them in ways that people are drawn in to see who the Messiah is. So, after this beautiful moment where they're sitting on the blanket having a picnic, they're dipping bread in wine, Boaz talks to his boys, and he pulls his boys in. And he says, "Boys, I want you to give this lady space in the fields." Like, all right, boss, I want you to do some really shoddy work. I want you to accidentally knock some bales off the cart. I want you to, drop a bunch. We got you, boss. No worries. And they do just that. Ruth drinks from the water that the guys are drinking, and she goes home later that day loaded up with grain, loaded up with wheat. And when she gets home, Naomi looks at her and says, "Where have you been today?" And she says, "Look, I've actually been in the field of Boaz." And Naomi says, "Oh, Boaz, he's a cousin of your deceased, my deceased husband. He's a cousin." And she says he's a redeemer kinsman, which I'll tell you about in a moment. It's kind of like a technical term. Another one of these laws that help people who are destitute. And so she said, "You know what? It's probably good that you go and work for the rest of the harvest, the next couple of weeks, in his fields," because he had quite a few. And Ruth says, "Okay, no worries." And she says, "You know, it's probably better that way. Then you won't be raped in some other field." This is how dangerous it was to be out there, be a woman, and to be a Moabite woman especially. And so for the next couple of weeks, she works in the fields. And Boaz is very kind to her. And it comes to the time where the barley has all finally been gathered in, and it's taken into the threshing floor. And what happens, I guess, there was this party that took place. They would thresh the grain, the barley, and at the end they would have a meal and they would drink, and then they would sleep in the barn. And so Naomi says to Ruth, "You know, Ruth, it's about time we actually find you. It's about time, you know, we pull the trigger on this thing and we see where it goes." And she says, "What I want you to do, Ruth, is I want you to have a wash, and I want you to find your nicest dress and put some perfume on, and I want you to go to the threshing floor. But I don't want you to be seen. I want you to hide around. Wait till Boaz is finished. Wait till he has his meal and he drinks some wine. And then he's going to go and he'll lie down amongst the grain somewhere and he'll go to sleep." She says, "Hide yourself. And then when everything's quiet, I want you to go and I want you to sneak up to Boaz while it's in the Bible, right? This is in the Bible. I'm not making this up. I want you to sneak up and just uncover Boaz's blanket and just lie down next to him. And then when he stirs, he's going to ask you who you are. And the rest, you'll know what to do." And so Ruth does that. She's ready and she hides. And about midnight, Boaz goes and lays down and he falls asleep. And she goes and she lies down next to him and she uncovers his feet and puts the blanket on her. And then in the night, Boaz obviously is snoring or whatever he's doing. He rolls over and he wakes up and there's this beautiful smelling aroma and there's someone warm next to him. And he's like, this is after midnight. He's like, "Who's there?" And Ruth said, "It's me, your Lord. It's Ruth." Now it's pitch black. We don't know if a smile creeps over Boaz's face. The Bible doesn't say it. But she then says these beautiful words. Remember when Boaz spoke about God and how God she'd come and that God's wings would protect her? Ruth says to Boaz, "Spread your garment, spread your wings over me, since you are a redeemer." And Boaz says to her, "Stay here with me. Stay the night. And tomorrow I'm going to do exactly as you have requested. I'm going to save your mum, and I'm going to redeem back what was lost." And so Ruth stays, and then but he says, "Don't let anyone see you here." So very early in the morning, Ruth gets up and sneaks out, goes home. She reports to her mum what has happened, and her mum says, "Now let's wait and see. Something's going to happen here." And so Boaz goes, and he goes to the gate the local gate, which was like the local courts. And there's a bit of an issue. You see, what happens in the law is if a family member, through whatever reason, lose their land or property to creditors, there was written in the Mosaic code and law that another family member could redeem that at a price. You had to pay whatever price was asked, but you could redeem the land back if you were a relative. Well, this was the case. Boaz was a relative, but there was a closer relative who had a claim on this land. And so as he was waiting, that gentleman came along and he said to the man, he said, I'm thinking of buying Naomi's lands back that belonged to Elimelech. And you have the first right of refusal. So I want to know, do you want to buy it back? Do you want to add his lands to your portfolio? And the man said, yes, that's a great idea. I think I will. And then he says, but you need to know that in redeeming this whole situation, you'll need to, as it was in the Mosaic law, you'll need to marry Elimelech's stepdaughter and have kids by her and do the right thing and produce kids by her. And she's a Moabite woman. To that, the relative was like, whoa, he knew the law, right? This was not going to help with marital bliss, the fact that she was a Moabite. And so he was quickly back down. He said, whoa, no, I don't think I was happy with the land, but wow, now a wife and, I have to have kids, but, it's yours. And so Boaz actually buys and redeems the land. And he marries Ruth. And love wins. But that's not the end of the story, because there is an epilogue. It seems that Ruth gets preggers on the honeymoon, pretty much straight away. And she ends up having a little boy called Obed. And Obed just finishes Ruth with this genealogy, this little genealogy. But Obed is the father of Jesse. And Jesse is the father of King David. King David puts Bethlehem on the map. But also, for those of us who have read the boring bit at the beginning of Matthew and skipped over it, you'll notice that in that genealogy of Jesus, in the line that leads to Jesus, the Messiah, the Christ, there is 5 women included in that genealogy. Ruth is one of those 5 women. A Moabite woman who was not allowed in the assembly of the Israelites, along with 4 other women. There was Tamar. There was Bathsheba. There was Rahab, and there was Mary. All of these women, how can I put this? Their lives were marked by scandal. Tamar was raped by her half-brother. Rahab was a Canaanite prostitute. Bathsheba was seduced by King David himself. I don't think she had a lot to really say in that situation. Ruth was a Moabite outsider. And Mary was a pregnant, unwed teenager. All of these women found in the genealogy of Jesus had their lives exposed, I guess, to scandal. But all of them had their stories redeemed in Christ Jesus. So now what? It's time for you to come here and dip your bread in some wine and believe that Jesus is spreading his wings over you to be your Redeemer. You're going to say like Ruth, spread your wings of love over me, Jesus, for you are my Redeemer. And Jesus will, because his great love can redeem your story. As we come to the table, I want you to tell you the good news of this story. The good news is outsiders are welcome. I don't know whether you felt like an outsider. I don't know whether you felt your story needs to be hidden. I don't know whether you feel like my story can never be redeemed. I want you to know that as we come to the table, Jesus says, dip the bread in some wine. And we can say, Lord, spread your wings over me. Be my Redeemer. And he will.